is a code in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The code is real and mathematically provable. The Torah is over 3,300 years old, but seems to be filled with information about what is happening today, as well as mysterious repeating codes that support the biblical narrative itself. The codes now seem to be revealing hidden facts about stories within the Torah. It's like the book is coming alive. We found information about our current world, people, places, and events. Iran and Hamas, the 4,000 rockets that recently pounded Israel's border towns, as we investigate just what it's like to be near the Gaza Strip when rockets fall. We'll show you what they look like, and where people go to find shelter when it happens. We'll also see evidence of some actual miracles, when terrorists seem to be foiled by events that can't be explained. A disappearing wheat field, and a mysterious wind that pulls our rockets off course. In New York and Israel, we'll interview the world experts on the codes. Professor Robert Haralick, Rabbi Glazerson, Art Levitt, Dr. Alex Rotenberg, and Professor Eliyahu Rips, who spearheaded the Bible code since the late 70s. Have the codes been locked away until this generation in what many believe are the end of days?
The Torah codes typically look like this one, which was discovered by Professor Rips, almost like a crossword puzzle that is commonly called a table. The size of a table and the configuration of the words in it is determined by the key words inside. The axis keyword, which can sometimes even be a phrase, becomes the topic that all other words in the table relate to. The keywords are entered in Hebrew on a computer running Torah code search software. The computer searches the 304,805 letters in the Torah and looks for these words by using a method called equidistant letter sequencing. It's a skip code, and the computer can display how many times each entered word appears in the Torah, or not. Words that appear with very small skips, less than 10 characters, are often considered more than mere chance. The final results are often stunning and unexplainable.
And this was prior to the big Hamas war that happened in 2014, where these boys were kidnapped and murdered. So you thought you would look up a table about the 3 boys. But what you discovered was just so amazing that we call it the axis keyword is the first one that you put up to see. Show us how you do that.
So what we know that those children, those boys were killed on the year 774. What you see here is the following. You see here the Hebrew word Mot Ne'arim. Mot Ne'arim is the death of the boys. So now you can see here clearly the year Tafshin Ayin Dalet 774, and in it you see Hamas. See here I write the word Mechabel. In Hebrew means terrorist. Mechabel. You can see it down here. Mechabel. And then again I give the command to look for it in the table. So I have here also, I have here 28 times Mechabel, but I'm interested in the minimal. 28. But I want the minimal one. And what is the minimal one?
-4?
4, So altogether you have in this part terrorists of Hamas in the year Tafshin Dalet caused death to the boys. And then Professor Rips, looking into this table, he found the place, the area, the district where the boys were found buried. It was a field belonged to somebody, and the area where he found, it was in Hebron, but it was a small part in Hebron, which was called Herbet Arnav.
The table was sent to all the professors and rabbis for further study, and several new tables were created. This table, which was a collaborative effort, had all the most important keywords about the kidnapping of the 3 boys. But Professor Haralick was concerned that the probability factor and compactness of the words might be improved, so he created another table from scratch, which we're seeing here. Professor Rips, perhaps the one most responsible for moving the science of the Torah codes into reality, then worked on his own set of tables. As usual, his findings were impressive, with even more information grouped into parallel lines, making it more unlikely this table could be duplicated in any text other than the Torah. It also contained a new phrase, "killed my people," at the top of the page.
And then today, soldiers found the bodies of 16-year-old Naftali Frankel, the American, and his two teenaged friends, Gilad Sha'ar, 16, and El Yifrak, 19. The three had been hitchhiking home near the West Bank city of Hebron late at night and were never heard from again.
I think the codes have a lot to say about this new reality, which in fact is not so new because the codes were given to us, the Torah was given to us over 3,000 years ago. But now, in our generation, we're waking up to this gift that we received.
That there seems to be technology intertwined with the Torah.
In our generation, we need the technology in order to unlock the secrets in the Torah through this method of Torah codes.
If somebody produces a table and says, "Oh, this is an amazing table. Look how interesting it is," and he points to a couple of ELSs on the table, and they say, "Oh, look, it's on the table, and look how interesting it is. It's predicting some gloomy event someplace, okay, that is really a significant event, a big event," and somebody could ask, "Well, this is very interesting, the work that you've done, but maybe if I went to a novel that is just as good in the way it looks as your table, why should I think that your table is interesting? It's just a random thing that happened, and you used by interacting with a computer application, a program, and if that table can be produced, a similar kind of table using some Hebrew text that has nothing to do with any religious tradition, then it surely is the case that your table is really not interesting. It was just a random event." So how do you counter that kind of an argument? And indeed it's the case. You give me any keywords you want, and I go to a book that's in that language, that is sufficiently long, sufficiently large number of pages.
Right.
And I'll produce a table that has ELSs of those keywords that you suggested.
Sure.
So how do I know that what is going on is really interesting? So now there's a key concept, and this concept is employed by code breakers in all of the equivalent places like our National Security Agency. You do an experiment, and it must be done in an a priori manner. You lay out what your keywords are. You lay out all the parameters necessary, and we see it here and say, "Oh, we have another keyword." Hey, that's not a priori. You found it by snooping, looking
Right.
at the table. If the Torah text and all the monkey texts were 1 million texts total, and we found that 10 texts had a number as good or smaller than the Torah text, then the probability that the event we observed on the Torah text, the probability that it would happen by chance, is 10 divided by 1 million, 1 out of 100,000.
And so can you run 1 million other texts at a time in the Monte Carlo experiment?
Yes. Yeah, we can run. It just takes, it's not,
Yeah.
it doesn't happen in 3 seconds.
Right.
Maybe it takes some hours to do.
Do you link a bunch of computers together and network them in order to get more power to do that?
We have programs that will run on a Cray machine, a supercomputer, and can utilize many, many cores. If we need to, we can do that.
So I asked Professor Herelick if as an experiment he would run some tables based on the keywords in Professor Ripp's well-noted Twin Towers table and do it using monkey texts that were non-encoded. So he did. The results showed how the Torah text was well ordered, and that while the other texts had the same key words, the resultant codes were completely insignificant and required thousands of letters, while the one Professor Rips found came up entirely in chapter 20 of the book of Numbers.
Again, they're showing that this outside agency is able to construct the first 5 books of the Bible, i.e. the Torah, in such a way that there are codes within messages which sometimes overlay the plain text, which is just astounding when that happens. When someone does a code and all of a sudden the answers come right over the plain text, which of course is very apropos to what the question was. So you've got the plain text, which, let's say, one of my favorites is 3,000 died that day, and the Twin Towers, that whole matrix in the code was profound. And the Torah code seemingly is calling out the amount of people who perished that day before the body count was actually tallied up.
During the BP oil disaster in 2010, a table was discovered with the keywords oil well, leaking, and the date, all found over the plain text. The fountains of the deep were broken up from the book of Genesis.
Time-space displacement, and time-space as we know it is really an illusion. We're stuck in space-time, but the God of the Bible dwells outside of space-time.
In 2008, I met with Professor Rips to see what the Torah codes might say about the year 2012.
Nearby you have butal, which means cancelled. And in the plain text we say, lo yeh, will not be on it. Will not be. This is Exodus chapter 16, verse 26. Actually, it says they are planned because cancelled means that something was designed to happen, and then for some reason it is cancelled and will not happen. So this just points exactly to this point that we are discussing, that if we even see some that might be very clear indication, still it could be reversed by the additional events or additional commentaries that we have here. So this is something that one have to bear clear in the mind. Otherwise, this will lead to major confusion and misunderstanding.
When you discover that people are talking about some major topic, and then you look for key words in a Torah code experiment, and you find it, it doesn't mean that that is going to happen in the future. It means that people are talking about it. Those key words, attack, Twin Towers, airplane, were in the topic sentence of headlines in newspapers all around the world, in fact. People were talking about the event.
Back in Israel, Richard and camera crew decide to visit Silwan, a community of both Jewish and Arab residents who live in this East Jerusalem neighborhood. Silwan is a cluster of homes and apartments built on a hillside with views of the old city. Israeli Jews have been buying property in Silwan for years, and both Arabs and Jews have lived here peacefully until recently. Dwellings almost seemed to hang out into the air along the hillside, but today there was trouble. The purchase of homes by Israeli Jews and the recent Hamas war spawned a stoning in the area. We were turned around by Silwan police as we were unaware of the drama unfolding in the narrow street ahead.
On this day that there was supposed to be a ceasefire, that Israel was 8 days into the war, there had only been an aerial campaign, and Israel was convinced there was going to be a ceasefire. The Hamas had assured the Egyptians, the Americans, and the Israelis through the Turks and the Qataris that yes, they were going to accept this ceasefire. A half hour before the ceasefire begins, they open up with a barrage. It was something like 120 rockets that day.
I remember that.
That was really sleight of hand to take our attention off of what they were going to do that afternoon. That afternoon, they were going to launch their first terrorist tunnel attack. Several days before, there are a group of religious Jews from Bnei Brak who have a small factory that makes what's called matzah shmura. Matzah shmura means literally watched over matzah. It's like the uber kosher matzah for Passover, which has to be watched over from the time the first seeds are planted. They have to be planted according to all the biblical strictures. They're watched over all during the growing process, and every 7th year the land has to lie fallow. The land gets a Sabbath as well. It's a sabbatical year. So this group of religious Jews was looking for a large field of very green, unripened, tall wheat that they could harvest immediately and store for 2 years, because next year there won't be any wheat. They look all over Israel. They can't find anything that meets their needs. Finally, down in an area called Otef Azah, which is like the envelope of Gaza, right on the border, they find acres and acres of a wonderful field, 5 feet tall, super green wheat, planted according to all the biblical strictures. And they go to the farmers and they say, we want to make a deal to harvest all of it right now. And the farmers said, well, you know, we want to make sure we get the price for it that we would pay in September. And they haggle back and forth, and they say, it'll be a good deal for you. You won't have to work these extra 2 months, no irrigation, no upkeep costs.
Just the expense of growing it, they won't be out.
And you won't have to sell it piecemeal. We'll take the entire crop. You won't have to sell a little here and a little there, but we must harvest today, because every day that goes by, we're losing the ability to store it for 2 years. We want it at its greenest state. We're right now less than 3,000 meters from the border. That's a closed military area.
It's the closest we've been so far. On the border.
Close to Gaza land right now.
Yeah.
As you can see, this field's been harvested and plowed under already. 2 days after they harvest the field, 13 Hamas terrorists pop up from a tunnel right in the middle of the field.
In the middle of the field.
And if you take a look over here, you'll see, not revealing any military secrets, everybody knows it, there's eyes in the sky, there's an observation balloon.
Right, it's like a, I wasn't sure what that was at first.
There are cameras all along this area, and there's a unit of female soldiers, all female, all girls, who watch monitors 24 hours a day, because boys don't have the same powers of concentration.
No, they don't.
When they popped up, as they come up out of the tunnel, they do a ninja somersault and then look around going, where the heck's the wheat field? This was supposed to be our camouflage.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Instead of being invisible, they're now visible to everything.
They're totally exposed.
A 19-year-old girl sees them. She immediately sounds the alarm. There's an aerial asset that engages them, hits them with a missile. We have a special ready response team that engaged them within 90 seconds. Half the terrorists were killed, the other half the terrorists were driven back down into the tunnel. And every newspaper account that you'll find will tell you, but for those religious Jews who were following biblical strictures, we would have had a disaster.
I was in one of those tunnels recently, and the sheer effort and ingenuity that went into constructing those things is an indication of the absolute malignity of Hamas and the way that it intends to burrow underneath the Israeli border, capture Israelis, massacre Israelis, drug them, take some of them back, and no doubt extort ransoms or kill some of them when they get them back to their territory. Right. The Israelis believe that they have taken care. Well, they know they've dealt with all of the tunnels that they know about. They don't know whether they've got all of the tunnels. There might be others that they don't know about. I have no doubt that Hamas will continue to try tunneling, as indeed I have little doubt that Hezbollah up in the north have already tried and are at present attempting to tunnel under the border as well. It's a real problem for Israel, and Israel now, I know, will be absolutely set on developing technology that enables them to detect the construction of these tunnels, and will have to then take serious military action to deal with any further tunnels they find. The Al-Nusra Front, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, is of course right on the border between Syria and Israel. They don't present, I don't think, an absolute immediate threat to Israel, although if they establish control along the border, then they will potentially carry out infiltration across the border and attempt terrorist attacks against Israel. Equally, I think the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, goes by different names, has declared their intention to take over Jordan, of course, neighbouring Israel.
Right.
And if that happens, it would provide a very good launch base for serious attacks against Israel. So I think it's in the West's interests, in the United States' interests, Europe's interests, Israel's interests, as well as Jordan's interests, that Jordan does not fall to the Islamic State, and every effort's taken to protect that and prevent that from happening.
What are your views upon, and this may not be a fair question, but I'm intrigued with it, that recently there was a comment made by the Palestinian Authority that they wanted to claim Jerusalem as their capital.
I think the Palestinian Authority want two states here. They want to control the West Bank and Gaza themselves. They want the IDF out. There's no question about that. And of course they want Jerusalem. They want the whole of the territory. In fact, they want the whole of Israel, Palestine for themselves. But in my view, if Israel goes to the extent that the United States, the EU, and other countries want, which is to allow the Palestinian Authority to take over the West Bank fully and Gaza fully, I think that will lay Israel open to huge threats. In my opinion, Israel would be very, very wrong if it went along with that. I'm sure it should give the Palestinians as much autonomy as they could possibly have, but it must not sacrifice its own security presence in the West Bank in particular. If it does, we will see the same situation as happened in Gaza. We will see terrorists using the territory of the West Bank in order to attack Israel, except on a much bigger scale.
Do you think that all of this is kind of coming to a head, that some kind of resolution is going to have to be made, or Israel will be faced with continuous wars like every 2 or 3 years?
My view is that Israel will be faced with continuous conflict for the foreseeable future. It's faced conflict ever since it was born in 1948 and even before that. But I believe it will be continuously attacked by various different factions in various different ways, to the extent that it has to maintain its current level of defences. I don't see any solution. It may be in 25 years the world has changed, but certainly in the foreseeable future I don't see any possibility of Israel being able to lower its guard, unfortunately.
After all of these tables that you've done, and there are almost 2,000 of them now that you've done, and you published them on YouTube. But do you see a pattern emerging? Do you see something happening in the Torah codes now that you've done so many of them?
I can see so clearly that the Torah was a blueprint of creation.
A lot of people, when you talk about the Torah codes or what they used to be called the Bible code, and the only reason I don't like to call it that is because I don't believe that there is a code all the way through the Bible, because to me that doesn't make sense. There's so many different books in the Bible, and they were written in different languages, but the Torah is really unique, and this is the first 5 books of the Old Testament are the only books like that. So to me it only makes sense.
Exactly the proper Hebrew words. So you cannot put what you like, because like in this table we did today, you cannot put different than Hamas, because Hamas is Hamas. You cannot put different word than terror, mechabel,
Well, that's your specialty, to know ancient Hebrew.
You must have the proper Hebrew, Otherwise you can put what suits you, you see. So the first thing, this is clear, that every word which was used, is proper Hebrew.
Some of the words here popped out were surprises. We didn't know in advance what we were going to look for. And that's an all-important statistical factor that can mean a difference between 1,000,000 to 1 and ordinary. So to what we found was that there's a repetition going on. So that when we find a code that looks interesting, we don't yet say that it's statistically significant. We can't say that. But we've been given permission to use those same words again.
In an a priori sense.
And then it becomes a priori.
Yeah.
So then when those same words again appear somewhere else, it's a completely a priori experiment, and the result is...
Because the phrase has already revealed itself.
Right.
So you can use that phrase as another
It's like waking up in the morning and saying, I think I'm going to see Jack today, and then it actually happens.
Sure. Dr. Alex Rotenberg has had a huge influence on how the Torah codes are searched on a computer. He wrote the software called Soft Torah that many of the researchers use, and was the first to utilize a way to graphically present the Torah tables. It's still the software that Glazerson and Professor Rips use. I met with Dr. Rotenberg at his home, where he showed me his latest tables.
An ancient Jewish tradition tells about the flood and about giants that fell from the heaven.
Dr. Rotenberg has done several tables on the Nephilim, and L.A. Marzulli commented,
I believe that this seed war, which we're spoken of in Genesis 6, has to do with the Nephilim, which is one of my areas of expertise. I believe that we're seeing all this begin to manifest in ways that are unprecedented.
The sons of the giant from among the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we were in their eyes.
I couldn't help but wonder why there were numerous tables that Dr. Rotenberg discovered in the Torah about the giants, and why that information seemed to be locked away until now.
A reference in the controversial ancient Jewish text known as the Talmud mentions boiling waters during the Great Flood. Ramban, a brilliant commentator on the Torah and Kabbalist from the 13th century, also seemed to agree. The Torah code table that Dr. Rotenberg discovered today seems to support this theory. The codes appeared over the plain text about the flood.
Dan, I appreciate you bringing us here to the Sderot police station, where they have quite a collection of all sorts of rockets. This probably is just a small fraction of the rockets that have actually fallen here in Israel. Tell us about what we're looking at here.
Sderot has been the city that's been hit hardest and longest by Hamas, because we're only 3 kilometers from the border here. And so the most primitive rocket that Hamas ever had, which was the first generation of Qassam, which were homemade, had a range of between 4 and 5 kilometers, which puts Sderot right smack in the middle of their range. And so these people literally, for 12 years, almost 13 years, have always lived under the threat of constant rocket attacks. If you came into town, you saw that every 50 meters, there's what looks like a bus stop, except it looks like a thick bus stop. Mm-hmm. Those thick bus stops are actually bomb shelters. So imagine that you live in a town where if the siren goes off, you have between 12 and 15 seconds to take shelter. And if you can't get to shelter in between 12 and 15 seconds, you're dead.
And suddenly there was a code red alarm, and there were only a few seconds to find shelter, and a missile flew right through here, and it was aimed at this building. And it hit this tree right here. And if you come up close, you can see where it broke off a branch, and interrupted the trajectory of the missile, and so the missile landed right here. You can see this hole in the ground that has been filled up.
Yeah, you guys catch things up so fast you'd never know anything happened.
And at that time, it was a huge boom that you could hear for miles around. There was a big cloud, an opaque cloud of dust that settled on this lawn, and when the dust lifted, everybody was intact, and they saw that the only thing that had been damaged was that one tree.
By motors you should be fast, you can't do nothing. But when the rocket, then you have the time to enter into a bomb shed like that.
So this is it.
That's one. You stay here, you wait for 50 seconds, you hear very strongly the noise of the bombs landing down.
Yeah.
You pray it did not attack your apartment.
How many people do you think can fit in here?
I can say 15 people.
15 people?
Yes. It's a heavy compact.
Yeah.
No bomb can damage it. And look at the yellow line here. You should stay
behind the yellow line, right?
It, otherwise, because if someone fall here, it's attack the wall.
Yeah. Boy,
it's a very simple, easy shelter, but you don't need more. What you need is just being fast enough.
In the IDF video where they're talking about the different kinds of rockets that have been pounding Israel, they show a man with a big piece of pipe on a lathe actually cutting one of these pipes out, probably in a home there in Gaza.
These rockets are absolutely deadly and unfortunately very easy to make. So even when the rockets weren't being able to be smuggled in through the smuggling tunnels, you can have a homemade rocket industry that takes very little technology, very little material, and yet is extremely deadly. The M302s are called the Khaybar rocket. Well, Khaybar in the Quran is where the Muslims slaughtered the Jews. And basically, the meaning of the Khaybar rocket is, it's the Jew killer. Not the Israeli killer, it's the Jew killer. They had 2 times of day that were their favorite times for launching rockets. One was when parents dropped their children off at kindergarten, and the other is when parents picked their children up from kindergarten.
That's right. This kindergarten was built a few years ago, and in its entirety, it's a shelter. And so when the children are in this kindergarten and there's a code red alarm, they don't have to go anywhere. They're safe inside. And so this is one of the only places where children of below school age could play during the recent operation. They couldn't be outside. They couldn't be in most of the regular children's houses. They're not safe enough. But this kindergarten is perfect because it's totally safe and they don't have to be running anywhere or worried that something might happen or something might penetrate.
How do you explain to these kids what's going on, or what do you tell them?
You know, that's one of the challenges of living in a place like this. You know, this is a place that was built up since 1947. It was created from nothing. It's a 4-generation community. But how do you explain to children that there are people that want to kill them? And it's not theoretical. It's not hypothetical. It's not like you're saying there were people that were enemies of a certain nation once upon a time, or you know, bad men, or you know, bad people. Physically, they see bombs falling. Physically, they see people running for shelter, and you have to somehow convey to them that we are united and we want peace, but there are people out there who want to harm us.
It could start in a moment immediately with any formal...
No warning.
And here we reach the place. That's an example. That's an example of a damage made by a mortar shell. But we can look from...
Through the window?
From the window. You can see the holes in the wall. It's penetrate into the next rooms. Can you see?
Oh yeah, I see. There's a hole in the other wall.
The hole,
several holes.
Several holes there that part of the shell penetrate into the other rooms.
Wow.
Thank God no one was there.
Yes.
But the damage is a damage, look.
Was anyone hurt?
No. No one was here.
That's wonderful.
If someone would be here, it would be a very fatal situation. But that's the story of living for 14 years under the threat.
What do you think is the solution to all of this? And a lot of us are perplexed by the news media's poor job of really covering the truth of the situation. They make Israel out to be the bad guy when Israel is the recipient of the attack. So what do you think the solution is?
It's very difficult to explain someone who is not living here. What does it mean living for 14 years under rocket attack? Growing children that from day one are suffering from trauma, post-trauma, families under, I would say, tension, unrelaxed, because you never can forecast when it starts, when it finishes.
I mean, this thing's heavy. I mean, you can see the tail fins are bent, but look where it exploded. And we just have ribbons of steel. Now, this is heavy. I can't even bend this with my hand. It's just too thick. So imagine the force required to do something like that. It's just unbelievable. Say this is going off in your front yard, that's going to cause some real damage somewhere.
This is a rocket that you can see by the date on it was fired March 31st, 2013. Now, what's important about that is we had a ceasefire with Hamas in 2012 after Operation Pillar of Defense. This says that this fell in the industrial area of Sderot. So it means this fell where it was populated, where people are going to work. Again, Hamas loves to fire rockets at times where people are going to drop their kids off to school or showing up to work or leaving work.
Yeah. I think the last total that I heard was something like 3,200 missiles, but that total came out during a supposed ceasefire, and then they started firing again, and I heard they fired like over 100 after that.
Actually, more. The total that I heard was correct as of the final ceasefire, a little over 4,000 rockets in roughly 4 weeks.
The first known code found in the Torah was discovered by Rabbi Bakia ben Asher, who lived in Spain in the 13th century. He discovered a 4-letter word in Genesis, created by skipping every 42 letters. His discovery related the formula for the average length of the lunar month. After computers were invented, this Torah code was produced with the rabbi's 42-letter skip, with newly discovered words nearby. Centuries passed, and Sir Isaac Newton believed there was a code in the Torah, possibly connected to gematria or how hidden numbers might open greater secrets. He spent many years of his life studying biblical prophecy and trying to unwind what he thought were clues to the end of the world. By analyzing many scriptures mathematically, this brilliant scientist finally believed the event would happen in the year 2060. Rabbi Bakia's early discovery intrigued Rabbi Michael Dov Weissmandel. He was a mathematical genius and is most credited for the discovery of equidistant letter sequencing that is used today to find Torah codes on computers. Decades passed as the secrets of the Torah codes remained hidden, but now a working method was available once computers were invented. In 1968, Professor Rips was a young man with a desperate plan.
Some people know that when you were in Czechoslovakia in 1968, you protested the Soviet invasion that was happening at the time.
Czechoslovakia suddenly started to develop some freedom within it, which was unthinkable at that time. We have the information just from the foreign broadcasts. Of course, in the Soviet press you could get nothing about this.
Sure.
Our group of students was sent for this military training in Kaliningrad. It was scheduled for July, August 68, and then when I saw the Soviet army, I realized that they are just waiting to go in. Before there was any official decision of it, that just seeing this general atmosphere already want to have be very pessimistic. Extremely bad feeling and no way to express it. And then the times went on that I in some place it exploded and I went to protest against this.
The way that Eliyahu Rips decided to protest was to follow the lead of a previous student who had set himself on fire and died 3 days later. So distraught was Rips at the time, and with the fear of ending up in the hands of the KGB, dying itself seemed better than living. He planned his protest well in advance and prepared for it at home. He soaked a paper in gasoline and wrapped himself with it under his coat. On a folding piece of cardboard, he wrote, "I protest the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia," and hid it inside his jacket. Soaked in gasoline and armed with matches, Rips walked the 200 meters from his apartment to Freedom Monument in Riga. He knew that once he opened his sign, that it was the point of no return. He would have to go through with it. He held the sign in front of him and lit a match.
What went through your mind when you You saw flames coming up.
I saw the flames, but then it's a short period of time I don't remember now. And I was later told that there was a group of bypassers who extinguished me. Immediately there was a big crowd, hostile, but it is entirely possible that the people who would feel otherwise would just keep their mouths shut. They brought me to the psychiatric asylum. Right. It is just a routine for any suicide attempts. So they put me there. Then in the morning, the KGB returned already with a signed order of arrest, and they took me to Riga prison.
Prison became productive as he spent his time working on mathematical formulas. In a truly fortunate twist of fate, he was released after only 2 years and ended up in Israel for the first time in his life.
Jerusalem is a melting pot of both Arab and Jewish beliefs and customs. Being raised an atheist, Rips had never seen such an open demonstration of religious faith like he saw there, let alone the small businesses that inhabit the Jerusalem Mall.
He realized that he needed to understand what it was all about and began studying the Torah.
Have the idea that there is a creator of the world. Now, but something else caused major difficulties. What I mean that when I started to read Torah, it turned out that it tells us about miracles. And I was just educated that miracles do not exist.
Well, there have been a number of sort of hand of God miracles, and that's just what they are. They're hand of God miracles that have been reported in the press, so I'm not giving you anything that even the Army has to sign off on because they've been reported widely. This rocket is heading towards Azrieli Tower. The commander of the Iron Dome battery, first interceptor is fired, misses the rocket completely. He fires a second interceptor. It misses the rocket completely, which is very rare. He has one interceptor left. He's got 4 seconds, and there's an alarm that he can sound if he knows that the rocket's going to hit in a populated area, and it's a mass casualty attack, and it starts the first responders rolling right away, and it gives the location. He hit the alarm because he said, we are not going to be able to intercept this rocket.
Because there's only 4 seconds.
He said, there's no way we're going to be able to hit it. Now, Iron Dome also measures wind velocity because that changes the track of the rocket.
Sure.
From out of nowhere, a giant gust of wind came, took the rocket, blew it out over the Mediterranean where it exploded harmlessly. The entire battery of soldiers jumped up and began shouting, Yesh Elokim, there is a God, there is a God, there is a God. And the guy said, the minute the war is over, I'm entering a seminary. He said, I was an atheist before, I totally believe it now.
And all through the Torah, there's nothing but miracles.
And then Torah tells us about miracles. So I am in a big trouble. I would like to believe Torah. I just love it. But I know that there are no miracles. And Torah says there is miracles. What could we look for evidence? Maybe historical evidence or archaeological evidence. A place to look for miracles could be in the book that reports these miracles. I went to Rabbi Yaniv, and he gave me the book of Rabbi Weissmatel. This immediately was extremely interesting because there was a certain way to search in the Torah which could be easily done into a computer search. There was the Apple computer.
The Apple II?
Yes, it now looks like from the Stone Age, yes, but it already existed.
I remember Apple II.
It didn't have enough memory in those days to put the whole Torah text in.
No, we do not have that whole Torah in the computerized way.
Yeah. So you would end up with codes that were a string of numbers.
Yes.
And then you would have to decode that
Okay.
to read it.
So, but this is easy thing.
But
to
it
do.
worked.
Yes, of course.
Here is an example of one of those earliest codes about the Vilna Gaon, a genius in the 1700s.
Professor Rips realized he needed to find a way to show that the Torah codes are real. To do that, he and his associates work on codes that make a statement in a single line of text that reads like a full sentence, or that appear over the plain text that support the encoded topic. The text appears with the same number of skips throughout. The odds of this happening by chance are incredibly small. In the table on bin Laden, we have a 29-letter text that was discovered several years before he was actually killed in the raid on May 2, 2011. The text reads, "Destruction I will name you. Cursed is bin Laden, and revenge belongs to the Messiah." The word Messiah could also be translated as the Anointed One. The probability that all these words could end up in such a coded phrase is 1 in 83,000. After this table was discovered, Rabbi Glazerson and others went into the same table and found associated words nearby that seem more than coincidence. New phrases appeared, like "surely will be killed" and "will be shot." Even more descriptively, in the United States, he caused trouble.
In 1802, William Paley wrote a book called Natural Theology, most known for his comparison of intelligent design to a watchmaker. The original book had illustrations showing the complexity of various organic forms. In 1986, atheist Richard Dawkins was praised for his book, The Blind Watchmaker, crediting Darwin for the discovery of natural selection. He later hosted a documentary film where he promoted the belief that evolution was the key. Professor Rips explored the idea in the codes and came up with another table in a complete sentence where it seemed as if the encoder was providing some assurance of his own existence. The table says, "The watchmaker. Yes, I do exist."
Professor Rips's detailed work on finding codes in complete sentences are evident in this dual table about an apparent economic crisis. He found the same keywords in a complete sentence twice, saying economical stock breakdown and economic stock crises. Like what Professor Herelick was saying, this may be an example of what people are talking about.
Then Professor Rips wanted to show me something he had discovered. He had to create many new tables, but what he found was amazing. Using the early chapters in the book of Genesis, Rips discovered codes that supported the actual biblical narrative about Adam and Eve. In the plain text it says, "And the snake said to the woman, 'You will not surely die.' While in the Torah codes, intersecting that actual line of text, it says, 'The snake will kill,' as if a warning has always been encoded. But pulling back to reveal the whole page and turning the background gray so it's easier to see, there are 3 separate groups of plain text and codes on this one table alone, intersecting stories and deeper information about these ancient scriptures that are opening up now for some reason. The table is all about the punishment of Adam and Eve and how they became mortal beings. In this well-known passage it says, "She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband, and he ate with her." Intersecting that line are the words guilty, the death, the angel, and will die. Below all this, more of the plain text says, "He drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the flaming sword which turned every way," which is the story of how Adam and Eve were barred from ever re-entering the garden. In the codes intersecting that same line are the words guilty, trembling, and death, which we know today as being the penalty for the sin of Adam and Eve.
I think that the Torah codes are showing the complexity, not only of just the plain text, but now in modernity, as we begin to see these, with the use of computers, that we're able to go in and what used to take maybe months now happen very quickly. We can see these messages that are integrated in with the text, and that to me is absolutely profound.
There's a need for hope in our generation, especially these days, and I think the codes provide a lot of hope. We see a combination of death and destruction, and also a great hope that there will be joy, finally.
Yeah.
We don't know what the combination of death and destruction and joy is going to be, but we know that the end game is joy.
So really what you're saying is 1976 was the year that all of you kind of found out about it.
Came out, work on it.
Right.
And now the end of darkness is basically when you don't see things, you don't understand what is going on.
Right.
Now the codes tell you what is going on.
Of course, the original Torah did not have any punctuation marks or commas.
You've shown me some really interesting things about when you take the commas out of a passage in Hebrew, it actually opens up something that we didn't expect to be there.
That is a known fact. If you go today to a synagogue and you read any of the scrolls, you would find no punctuation marks. They were added by the Mesorites of Tiberius at later time. So for example, this is a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 28. Our brothers have frightened us, saying there are people there superior to us with large fortress cities. And then comes a nebulous word, in the sky, for no apparent reason, and we saw the giant people there. That's what the spies are saying.
It's referring to the Nephilim again.
Yes. So what happens is that this comma was added because they didn't quite understand why the word in the sky all of a sudden appeared. The comma was added to the Hebrew.
Right.
The Hebrew passage. And
well,
then,
the only reason I ask is because in some translations I read it talked about walls reaching into the sky.
Correct. So they try to understand the passage. However, I am not, if you just are being very, very literal and not trying to understand the passage, but reading it as is, as it was originally written, and without the commas, so I will remove them. And if you read it correctly, it clearly states, Arim gdolot ubetsurot bashamayim, great fortified cities in the sky. There was no word back then for UFOs. How could they explain what they saw? They saw giant people who are superior, and they have giant fortified cities in the sky, and they couldn't say, well, we saw UFOs. There was no word for it.
So this also hints to another level of technology going on during that period, perhaps.
I believe that there was, at that time, as opposed to today, open involvement, visitation. There was no need to keep it a secret. If you wanted to park your spaceship, you could.
Sure.
And this belief is based on more than just this passage. If you look at the scope of evidence from that era and from other eras, there are many, many parallels that can be drawn that allude to this fact.
And I realize that this is sort of a no man's land here, but I think the codes may actually be sort of a modern day Urim and Thummim. In other words, going back to where Israel would ask a question, and with the breastplate and the stones would light up, the ephod. And I think that perhaps the Torah codes are a type of modern day ephod. And I realize, whoa, that's really incredibly controversial. But the ephod is I use the word, I know else with the flack of this, but the ephod is a really spooky device. I mean, think about it.
It was almost like there was some technology involved.
There's something weird's going on. The stones are lighting up and they're creating a message. It's like, huh?
The ephod was something that the high priest used when he had difficulties to go to war, not to go, and he got the answer to the letters. The letters of the stones of the ephod were shining, the Hebrew letters. And those Hebrew letters were shining and telling him the answer. Now we have the codes,
I think if you look at the Jewish people throughout history, they have found intellectual success. And one of the reasons why, I believe, is not because maybe they're genetically better. That's not true at all. It's that their talents have been brought out to the surface by this Jewish need to understand and know why. And everything about Torah and the Hebrew language and all these edicts and things to understand and fathom and wonder over has contributed to the creation of these minds that always wanted to seek and know more. I think the Torah codes are just one more element of that, because just like you can go into the geometry and mathematical connotations behind every word in Hebrew and explore there, you can also do these search algorithms on the Torah and explore there. But what is interesting is that whoever put the Torah codes in them knew we would reach a technological state at one point. Knew everything.
At this particular moment in history.
Yeah. And the question is, where is it all leading to?
It was a big case in Israel. It was a danger of attack, of the terrorist attack, very severe one.
After Rabbi Glazerson told me about this table, I thought we should see it. Dr. Rotenberg gave me some more details. Yes, it's true. This table seemed to predict a terror event. In August 2002, Igor Pasetsky, another researcher, sent a table to Dr. Rotenberg. Professor Rips had already found more than one table with the words mega terror in them, and now this new table had the words mega attack close by. Dr. Rotenberg found the date, Elul, which in 2002 was in the month of August. He started looking for a location and couldn't find anything. Professor Daniel Michelson, a known Torah code researcher, went to pray at the wall about this table and asked for mercy on Israel. The words mercy and kotel, a Jewish expression for the Western Wall, were found, as well as the word Israel. On the 10th of Elul, a group of terrorists were indeed arrested for trying to fill up a fuel truck with explosives and blow it up at a depot in Tel Aviv. Professor Rips went back into the table and found they will be arrested.
In 2006, they actually called up reservists for my unit, and I served into the 2006 Second Lebanon War. I had done a lot of on-camera work in the field during that war and had worked with CNN and what have you, reporting from the battlefield. And there was a woman who had seen me and made contact with me and said that she wanted to do some sort of a portrait as a tribute to the fallen soldiers and present the portrait to the families of the fallen. And would I help her out getting some pictures? And I said, absolutely. And so there was one picture of the 200 of me, and she said, that's the one I want. And we had not yet met, so she didn't know that was a picture of me at all. She did a photo montage, and it had King David's warriors looking down at this sort of nondescript Israeli soldier. And she said, I want to pick out a passage from the Psalms and put that underneath it.
Like a little inscription underneath.
Like a little inscription. Yeah. And she was going to present one to the foreign minister of Israel at that time, Tzipi Livni. And she picked out one of the Psalms, and she said, I'd like to have it engraved in Hebrew. Do you know anyone who does Hebrew engraving? And I said, you know, I don't know anyone personally, but if you go down to the Fairfax area of Los Angeles, where there are bookstores or Pico Robinson, you'll probably find someone who will do engraving. And she, in fact, found a rabbi who does engraving, and he said, I'm not sure that I want to give you permission. I'm not going to agree to it unless I know what the purpose is. And she said, well, I want to present this to the foreign minister of Israel. And he said, okay, that's a noble purpose. What's the passage? And she said, it's a quote from one of the Psalms. And he looked at it, and he said, that's not the right one. And she said, excuse me, I'm the artist, and I say that's the right one. And he said, no, I won't do that. And she said, well, I'll pay you. He said, you don't have enough money to pay me. I won't do that. He said, but I have some very powerful rabbis there's a circle of rabbis who I want to consult with because this is important.
So he really took it seriously.
Oh yeah, very much so. She said, great, and she's going to present it to the foreign minister of Israel, which she in fact did. At around that time, if you recall, you were trying to get a writer named Barry Morrow to help you with the Torah codes, and Barry was unavailable. And he said, I know this other guy, Dan Gordon, and this is right up his alley. Take my name, have Rabbi Harelek run a Torah code, and if my name is in there, then I'm supposed to be part of this project. And if my name isn't in there, then I won't bother you anymore. And said...
But it's more complex than just looking you up on Google.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, he needed everything about you, your father's name.
He had my father's name, my Hebrew name, my rank, captain in the Israeli army.
Right.
He ran all of those things in the code. And he called me up and he said, well, we found something, but it's really not very significant. It's interesting, but it's not significant. And I was really crestfallen. He said, but sometimes the portion that it's in itself has an additional meaning to the person that you're talking about.
Sure.
He said, so why don't you look up the portion, see if it means anything to you in particular. I looked up the portion. It was the exact quote that this group of rabbis had chosen to go under the picture of me.
And of course, Professor Harrelick probably didn't know that.
He knew none of that.
Yeah.
So here are the odds. A woman I don't know picks out a picture of me, doesn't know it's a picture of me. I refer her to an engraver who I don't know. He reads the quote that she's picked and said, no, I won't do that. I need to discuss it with a group of rabbis. He doesn't know me. They pick out a section of Deuteronomy. That's the section that I appear in the Torah code. So I called Rabbi Harrelick back and I said, so add this to the mix. Now what are the odds? And he said, incalculable. He said it's
amazing.
He said it's the second physical manifestation we've seen, the first one being during the Mumbai massacres.
The Taj was one of 11 sites targeted by the terrorists. At least 172 people, including 6 Americans, were killed.
We were just ripped to shreds by bullets.
Where the bullet went through the Torah scroll in Chabad House, exactly in the place in the Torah that it said Mumbai massacre
and that table was found by Moshe Katz.
Well, then to put icing on that particular cake, I asked him, I said, the name of the artist is Robin Hanley. Why don't you run and see if that appears anywhere near my name?
No, that I didn't know. Did he run a test with her name as well?
It intersected mine.
Oh, this is what it so amazes me about the Torah codes when things like that happen and when they actually point to a physical object in our time period. I mean, the odds are just incredible.
Yeah, he said that was literally a physical manifestation of the Torah code.
Anyone that spends a little time in Israel and listens to the people here can see that they simply want an end to the violence. They just want to raise their kids and be at peace. The Ala Negev Rehabilitation Center along the Gaza border treats autistic children and other medical issues for both Arabs and Jews. Yet that same facility was victimized several times by rocket attacks from Hamas. In today's modern society, sometimes it can seem that God is merely a fable, not involved with what's going on, with injustice, greed, and terror wiping out any hope of cooperation or love. But then we have these little glimpses from a 3,300-year-old scroll that seems to have been encoded. At times it's almost like a diary of events of our current day and appears to have been encrypted, time-stamped so that none of it could have been revealed until now. So what does this mean? Could the codes be a clue that we are reaching some sort of end to the problems that are affecting the whole world? Has religion become so steeped in dogma and ritual that we no longer believe the possibilities that miracles could exist? And a scary thought. Could we also be encoded in this book of miracles? And if we are, what does the Torah say about us?